So I got a new smartphone recently. Now, my previous Galaxy S10 was working fine after 4 years of use. I mean, definitely the OS had slowed down and everything. But really, the biggest problem I felt was the USB-C port. The USB-C port was like incredibly loose. It was very frustrating. Trying to charge stuff was a pain. Trying to use USB-C accessories in general was just sort of a pain. So, and you know how devices are now, you can't really repair them that easily. So I decided, I'm like, you know what? I might as well like upgrade to something newer, have a better USB-C port. So now I own a Galaxy S23 Plus that I managed to crack the screen protector in within a month of owning it. Yeah, go me. So after getting a new phone and messing with it, I just decided to finally learn about ARM. I finally had the reason and the motive and the push to learn about ARM processors, what exactly is going on, what the ecosystem kind of looks like. And man, these processors actually have a lot going on in them. Even if you just constrict it down to sort of like things comparable to a desktop PC use case, there is like a lot of interesting technology here going on. And yes, I know people talk about Apple Silicon, which are ARM devices on like a desktop PC form factor, but Apple Silicon is kind of its own weird animal. Like, yes, it is ARM, but it's Apple's own architecture. Their whole ecosystem is so tightly integrated, their own operating system, that it's not really comparable to like the smartphone stuff I'm really interested in looking into. So what exactly is the gist of phone processors if you're not particularly familiar with them? Well, I think almost all smartphones run off of processors that use the ARM instruction set. Now, ARM very famously is known for its very low power draw. Everything has to really be integrated onto the chip itself. If I was to compare it to, say, a desktop PC, a mobile SoC is kind of like a CPU plus a GPU plus like a motherboard's I/O kind of all rolled into one. Now, in smartphones, these SoCs tend to be pretty tiny. I think they're actually smaller on average than your average Ryzen core chiplet. These little chips have a lot packed into them. CPU cores, GPU cores, broadband connectivity, neural engine accelerators, various other accelerators for specific functions. Another big thing compared to x86, instead of Intel just hoarding x86 licenses all for itself and never issuing any new x86 licenses ever, ARM actually builds its business model around licensing out the right to build ARM cores and chips using ARM IP to other companies. Now, for the SoC inside the S23 Plus specifically, this is running the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which is the flagship chipset from Qualcomm. So what does that name exactly mean? Well, much like Intel with their I number branding, so like your i9, your i7, your i5, the first number really indicates sort of the tier that you're in. 8 represents the highest, you also have a 7, you also have a 6, etc., etc. And then the second number is the model number. So Gen 2 basically is the second generation after Snapdragon switched from the previous numbering system, which was using like 8 and then like 2 numbers after it, but they got like really, really high to like 888 and stuff like that. So they just switched to this new naming system. I know, I didn't know that mobile processors had as much of a disaster of a naming scheme as desktop ones do. If you're confused, Qualcomm is the one that designs the chips, but Snapdragon is like their catchy brand name for consumers for the SoCs themselves. So think like, GeForce for NVIDIA or Ryzen for AMD. And much like recent Intel processors, ARM has cores that are heterogeneous in design, meaning that multiple types of cores will be on the same chip. They'll have different functions. Some will be better at certain things than others. In fact, ARM was the one that started the heterogeneous trend, at least in the consumer space as far as I'm aware, and then Intel decided to follow that lead with their 12 series processors with their performance and efficiency cores. And much like Intel, you have your performance cores, which tend to be very strong at multi-threading when working together, but have a higher single-thread speed. And then you have your efficiency cores, so these tend to be for lower power tasks. But recent ARM designs have taken a further step, that they also include what's called a prime core. So a prime core is basically built exclusively for single core performance, getting the most amount of single core performance humanly possible. So that way the other cores can focus on low power tasks and multi-threading. And so because of this heterogeneous nature, you will see a lot of ARM processors recently be defined something like, 1 plus 3 plus 4. So 1 prime core, 3 performance core, and 4 efficiency cores. Now, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 does not follow that common design paradigm, interestingly enough. It actually uses a 1 plus 4 plus 3 design instead, opting for one more performance core over an efficiency core. Even weirder still, those 4 performance cores actually are not the same type of performance cores between them. There's actually 2 different types. So really, you have a 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 3 core design. Yeah, this definitely made my head spin when I first learned about this. I'm like, huh? That's weird. Now, from my research and people who know better than I do, the reason why it is this way is to maintain backwards compatibility with 32-bit applications, with the next big Snapdragon SoC expected to drop 32-bit compatibility entirely. So what cores exactly are in the 8 Gen 2? Well, we have our prime core, which is the ARM Cortex-X3. For the performance cores, you have a split between the A715 cores that are slightly faster, and then the A710 cores, which are slightly slower, but have that 32-bit compatibility. And for the efficiency cores, you have the A510. Now for the GPU, you have the Adreno 740. Now this is interesting because ARM does also make GPU designs that any of its partners can use, but Qualcomm opts to build their own GPUs instead. Now, if that Adreno name sounds familiar, it's because it should. Because it turns out that Qualcomm actually, years ago, bought like a part of AMD's GPU division for their own. And so Adreno is, the word Radeon just rearranged. Now, these SoCs have so much more to offer than just pure CPU and GPU horsepower. I mean, there's stuff like computational photography, neural engine performance that really, I'm really just going to focus on the CPU and GPU stuff. Now, I really wanted to find some applications that could really show what these SoCs could possibly do. I mean, obviously, I could just do benchmarks, but I think benchmarks are a little boring. I want to see some real-world kind of stuff. And so the best programs that I could show for the power of the Snapdragon was gaming. Now, I know it's a massive meme that technology YouTubers are just like have such tunnel vision only for gaming, but I really had no other options to show what this thing could do. Now, as for the games I'm testing, I'm using about 9 games. I wanted to try all sorts of different types of games, very intensive types of games, games designed primarily for mobile, new games, old games. I even threw emulation in there. Now, what I'm using to show and keep track of FPS / processor usage is this thing called GPU Watch. GPU Watch is this thing that's built into Android, although you have to go into the developer settings to enable it, that show you your GPU usage, your CPU usage, your game frame rate, and then some other miscellaneous info. To be honest, after all the testing, I kind of learned that GPU Watch kind of sucks in general. The first thing that I noticed about it was that it just said general CPU usage. It didn't show you CPU usage of any individual cores. Now, there are other apps that track your individual cores more precisely. The problem is they're not available as an overlay. So you have to have this app open, and you can just watch the CPU usage while you have this viewing app open. It's so weird. For all the gameplay I'm about to show here, I actually use the built-in screen recorder for Android, the little pull-down menu screen recorder. I'm actually very surprised that this thing even has encoding capabilities to begin with. I know that ARM processors tend to be pretty good at decoding because, that saves a lot of power. But an encoder, I'm actually kind of surprised by a little bit. All right, first up in my test suite here is Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Now, I've tested this game on desktop before, and it tended to be one of the lighter games, so I guess it should be no surprise that it's one of the heavier games on mobile. In fact, this game in particular, I was the only one I could see GPU percentages regularly hit the 90-something% range. You can see this old tier limit mirror footage I had. Tier limit mirrors can get kind of crazy with cards flying around and effects, fast forward replay, stuff like that. So, but I mean, it is holding near 60, full graphics and everything, and looks, I think, pretty good, you know, especially compared to the other versions. So, yeah. All right, but let's look at a Yu-Gi-Oh game specifically designed for mobile. This is Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, which came out in 2016. So this game actually runs at a consistent 60 with GPU usage just sitting around 30%. That's actually pretty cool. I'm just doing one of the tutorial stages here because I normally don't play Duel Links, and I was just curious about the performance. So you can get 60 FPS speed duel card game action on your phone. All right, next up is another card game, Marvel Snap. Now, I've been playing a fair amount of Marvel Snap on and off. It's okay. I wouldn't call it particularly great or anything, but it is a nice mix-up from Yu-Gi-Oh! Time to time. Now, I am running at the native resolution, and you can see my frame rate is hanging out around 60 with some drops in there. I'm actually really surprised at how heavy this game is on the GPU when cranked up. I don't know why I should be surprised, but there's nothing really that suggests to me that's like, hey, this thing like sucks down GPU performance a lot, at least compared to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. But hey, you know, the Snapdragon's doing its work. All right, let's actually mix it up. Let's do Dolphin emulation. So this is me running it, I think, at like, I don't know, 2, maybe even 3 times the resolution. It's running at around 720p from when I checked in the menu. Now, you can see that the game is like freaking out according to those charts. Like, it's just having all these bizarre spikes. I think what's happening with GPU Watch here is that it's taking my inputs, you know, because my inputs are on the screen, and that's messing with how it's reading the frame time data. And so that's causing all those weird, bizarre spikes. There was some slowdown and everything like that playing this game, but I was running the encoder at the same time, which didn't seem clearly designed to be run at the same time as games, but I would say with the encoder off, it actually was a pretty decent experience. Oh, Nintendo's not gonna like this. I'm playing Super Mario Galaxy, I think at 720p or maybe in 1080p. I don't exactly remember. Again, we start running into that issue with the GPU Watch just getting absolutely losing its mind anytime I touch the screen, because you notice if I stop, the frame rate and everything looks fine, but, you know, again, this capture program seems pretty flawed. I mean, it seemed like a pretty fine experience to me, and everything. So, now I decided to try this one out for fun because I'm a big fan of the Doom games. This is Mighty Doom here. I don't know, man. It's like kind of fun, but like, I wouldn't play it for like more than like 5, maybe 10 minutes at most. But you can see that it's using about 60% of the GPU, and I'm hitting, you know, around 60, not that many drops here. Looking pretty good and everything. The only thing I don't like about it is the vertical presentation, but again, you know, personal preference and all that. I actually think this game looks pretty decent for what it is. It definitely doesn't feel like it's wasting the GPU that it's been given. I had to try out Plants vs. Zombies, a mobile game classic on this, obviously, just for sort of like efficiency gains compared to what the average game from like, I don't know, like the late 2000s on a phone would look like. So this game's obviously locked at 30 FPS because, you know, it's old. But would you look at that, like a 10 to 14% GPU usage on a smartphone? Think about how little power that's actually drawing to run this game. I'm sure if it actually had like a whole field of plants, the GPU usage might go up a little bit, but still. And then we obviously have the big one that Snapdragon loves to show in all their marketing material about how much, you know, their GPUs are gaining. This is Genshin Impact. So I'm kind of running like the default settings here, like 60 FPS, kind of medium, sort of medium resolution and all that. So, I mean, this game looks really, really good. It's just the problem is the resolution just is absolutely terrible if you're thinking about looking on this on a device other than a smartphone. Again, it looked fine on the phone, but this is pretty blurry, to be honest. All right, so in this clip here, I actually try to increase the 3D resolution by setting it to high, but set my FPS cap at 30, or my FPS target. Now, I do seemingly have GPU headroom, but GPU Watch tells me that the game is actually running at like 40 FPS or hovering around there. That seems kind of weird. So this is the thing with Genshin Impact, is that if you turn on too many graphical settings, like even if your GPU
is not fully loaded, like at like, 70 something percent, that the game just freaks out and tells you like, hey, don't turn that on. All right, and then we have Fortnite here. To be honest, I'm actually really, really, really impressed with how this game looks on a smartphone. Yes, it does not look particularly good if you blow up this video onto a larger screen, but on the actual phone display itself, I think it looks pretty good. You can see the FPS hanging around 60 there. So I have this game set on like medium-ish. Like graphical settings, like 75% 3D resolution, textures high. And that's another thing that's really thrown me off about learning about phone stuff is that I am surprised that there's no like real graphics options other than like quality modes in these games. I was expecting like a full-on PC style menu where you're able to just select which graphical effects you want to turn on or off on your own will. But pretty much like I think most of these mobile games are just have like a low, medium, or a high preset. They don't really give you control over any specific graphics effects, which to me is like very like odd and interesting. Now, the last thing I wanted to try was the 90 FPS mode in Fortnite. I wanted to lower some graphical settings and see how the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 did with sort of high refresh rate stuff. Now, it didn't like consistently hit 90, but it was definitely above 60 plenty of times. Now, I couldn't get any footage of it using the recorder built into Android because turns out when you toggle the recorder, it locks your refresh rate to 60 hertz. So I couldn't get 90 hertz on the actual game itself, and because the screen recorder locked it.
So what's my conclusion here? Well, in learning about these processors and playing games on them, I actually have really found like a massive respect for Qualcomm and the Snapdragon brand, and really like all the effort that they put into optimizing and making these processors in general. Not that I disrespected them before or anything, because I obviously knew in the back of my mind, like, yes, silicon engineering is hard work, and getting processes to run on a phone like is important work to be done. But actually seeing that for myself, I'm really impressed. Like the fact that some of these games can even run as well as they do on a processor that consumes like what, a certain amount of watts that I can count on one hand. That is very impressive. It's very obvious to me now after doing all this that there's a lot of time and effort and care put into this process. That there really is like a lot of energy and just like enthusiasm about refining this and trying to stay on top and be the best possible. Unfortunately, that brings me to a real downside with the 8 Gen 2, but it's not really the actual processor itself. It's more just kind of the ecosystem. It is a damn shame that a processor this good is subsequent to live a life driving the most absolutely scummy garbage games I've ever seen. Because let's be honest, man, the mobile gaming ecosystem kind of sucks. There are games that are good on there, and there definitely are good showcases of what these SoCs can do. But from my testing, the best showcases of what these processors can do are either emulators, which are games that are not made for these devices initially, or games like Genshin Impact or Fortnite, which you can literally play on any other device. And this is why I think that having an ecosystem is as important, if not more important, than the hardware inside of it. Because the Nintendo Switch, which does run off of a similar mobile processor, the Tegra X1, much weaker than what's in the S23, has a way better gaming platform experience than phones. And why is that? It's because the ecosystem is curated and managed by people who actually care about giving you a great gaming experience. It isn't just exclusively trying to nickel and dime you at every step of the way. And so for me, at least in this initial exploration, it's kind of made like me kind of circle back to like silicon design being a boring thing, right? That if you try to explain to a normal person like all these intricacies of silicon design and why all that stuff is interesting, they won't particularly care. They just know that new phone go faster. I really care about that kind of thing. I like learning about the kinds of technologies that are in these devices. The experience that I've had is like so boring and kind of uninteresting that I just kind of don't care. That I'm like, well, you know, they made it faster, but like, what's the point of it? It's just gonna run crap. I don't care. Maybe that's why Snapdragon is really putting a lot of time and energy and effort into like creating a fan base around Snapdragon in general, which currently doesn't really exist. But that's a video for another day. So anyways, guys, that's it for the video. I hope you liked it. Like, comment, subscribe, and have a good day.